Carla, I am so glad to be here with you. It has taken us,
Likewise,
we've had to
finally.
climb mountains and bring in backup and make the universe work for us to get here, but we are here.
Yes.
I'm so happy to be with Carla Shohet. She's an integrative trauma psychologist in the UK. And her work is just so incredible. And we are going to get to both hear about all of the work that she does with the people that she serves, and also some of her story about experiencing vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress, and burnout, and what it was like for her to not really know what was happening and then to realize kind of the reality of what was going on in her brain and body. So, Carla, thank you so much for being here. I'm just so grateful that we are here and it's happening.
Same, we've done it.
I know.
Fingers crossed for the rest of this.
I
So
have
thank
faith.
you
I
so
have
much,
faith. It's
Jenny,
going
for
to
having
happen.
me. Yes. When there's a will, there's a way.
I know,
This is our
right?
third attempt, I think, isn't it? We got there in the end. All's well that ends well. I'm so pleased to be
Exactly.
here and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited about this conversation because when we first spoke a while ago now, we had such a brilliant chat. And I wish we had recorded that one as well because it was such a good one. So hopefully we can do that one some justice and share some of the insights from our worlds with people because I think it's really, really important, both not just for therapists like us, but also for other people to understand that we're not just therapists, we're just human
Mhm.
beings. So yeah, I'm excited about this one.
Exactly. And that experiencing vicarious trauma, burnout, all the things, those don't mean that you are not a good enough trauma therapist. They mean, like you said, that you're human, right? And they're
Yeah.
not fun, but especially when it comes to vicarious trauma, that actually is a normal thing for us to experience. And like your story is going to help illustrate, when we don't have the opportunity to wring out that vicarious trauma sponge that's gotten so full, it turns into other things like compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, burnout. So, can you tell me more of kind of your journey of getting to where you are today? Because I know that it's been a windy road for you. You've done so many different things, and along the way experienced a variety of these things.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with something before I forget, which I think is really, really important to kind of highlight from the beginning, which I personally don't believe that vicarious trauma or burnout have to be part of our life as therapists. We don't have to have those experiences. But the truth is that most of us do have that experience. And that's because the education we get, the standard education we get as therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, anyone in mental health is the foundational education we get is just not nervous system based, unfortunately, and therefore we very easily end up in experiences of burnout and compassion fatigue. They're real experiences, but they don't have to happen if we have the
Mhm.
right education about our nervous system, which we don't get unless we go and research it and invest in it. And I think what's important to say is that that's not a weakness if we have had that experience. I certainly
Yeah.
have. I didn't know that that's what was happening to me, and I'll explain about my story in a second. But it's also to do with the reality that I would say a lot of us, if not all of us, that go into this kind of world of wanting to help others with their mental health, spiritual health, well-being, it could be physical. We go there from a place of having been there ourselves.
Mhm.
And I think from my personal experience of in this profession, I now understand that one of the main reasons why I experienced such burnout through my work and kind of losing that passion and that experiencing that extreme fatigue of listening to people's issues and traumas over time was because I had unresolved trauma myself
Mm.
unknowingly.
Yep.
So I wanted to just kind of, give that kind of overview before we
There's
start going
so
into the
many
story.
layers. And like you're saying, without understanding and compassion for what it's like for us to do this job from a bottom up, nervous system up perspective, we are at such an increased risk of burning out and then jumping ship to save ourselves and leave the field, whether we actually want to or not.
Yeah. And I don't know whether you mentioned that, yes, in the beginning when you started to kind of introduce me, you said that doesn't mean that you're a bad therapist if you do experience burnout or compassion fatigue or, vicarious trauma, lots of different terms for similar things. However, we also do have a responsibility to be able to recognize when we are experiencing any of those things, because it means that at that point, our capacity to hold space in presence with someone else, which is to me that attunement, that dual attunement that creates that safety, which is key to being able to, for someone to be able to experience their emotions, their trapped stress, and be able to feel safe in relationship with their therapist. That is our responsibility as therapists, to be able to recognize, to gain the education and recognize that within ourselves, and
Mhm.
understand that, okay, we've reached our capacity, and therefore now it would be almost unethical, well, not almost, it would be, from my perspective, unethical to continue working and trying to earn money by helping these people when I do not have the capacity to do the
Mhm.
work for myself first.
Yeah,
Because then it just
absolutely.
becomes inauthentic and it's not the same space that we can offer to other people. So, having said all of that, I think if you're okay with it, I'll share my story.
Yes,
I am
please.
very wordy, so please, keep time for me and like do interrupt if I carry on too long. I started as your stereotypical psychologist, studied at university, all the cognitive stuff, all the amazing stuff that we do need. I'd never dismiss any of the cognitive parts of the brains. We definitely need them. That's what separates us from other social animals. Um, However, it's not enough. And that's what I discovered after about 20 years of being a psychologist, holding space for people with different types of traumas and experiences in life and stresses. And I absolutely love my job. I felt then, and I still feel now, that this is not just my job, this is my calling.
Mhm.
And it's a passion. And I hope you'll be able to see and feel that in this conversation as well. But after about, I would say, 16 years doing that profession, I did start to feel increasingly disconnected from people, and I started to experience what I now call compassion fatigue. And at the
Mhm.
time, I experienced it as in my own head, not in real life, but in my own head. I used to kind of inside myself roll my eyes at people's problems,
Mhm.
and think, oh, they're not that big a problem. They're just making a mountain out. Basically, lots of judgment coming through in my head, which made it extremely difficult for me to be compassionate as much as I wanted to be. And obviously, that triggered lots of other parts of me that made me feel bad about myself. This is not right that I feel this way. I'm being judgy of other people, lots of internal conflict for me.
Mhm.
And it took, I'm embarrassed to say, but it took a good, I would say, about 4 years before I decided enough was enough. This is not who I want to be, neither in my personal life nor certainly in my work and in my profession, which, I was always very good at. And I always had a very full clinical practice because I care, because I
Mhm.
really care. I cared then and I cared now. And having this kind of disconnect within myself where I didn't care for everybody to the same level because almost their problems were not big enough for me to, have
Yep.
compassion towards. It just felt really dysregulating for me.
Well,
And
and
I felt
I
really
don't know
bad
if I
about
shared
myself.
this with you in our first conversation, but I don't remember if you shared it or framed it in the same way then, but now you describing it as really noticing that you were having a hard time caring for and being attuned with people, kind of depending on their presenting problems. I can so
Right.
relate to that. I just want you to know. And
Thank you.
it really kind of like clicked something for me actually, because years ago too, probably 5 or 6 years ago, I something that I would tell people a lot is like as a trauma psychologist, I was like, I do trauma and PTSD, like that's what I do, right? And it felt one like good to know what my lane was and my specialty, and we have such amazing interventions for trauma and you can see people get better, but I also was like, I don't work with anxiety. I was like, I don't work with
So
people who are
interesting.
just generally anxious and anxious about things all the time. And internally, what I was saying was, their problems are not important enough for me. They're not big enough. And now you saying that helped to click this for me. I actually had not made that connection previously because now I have done so much of my own work around my own vicarious trauma and burnout. And also, like you have shifted and integrated a lot more somatic and nervous system interventions. And even though I knew it then, I now actually embody it that all of those things are connected. They're all kind of the same thing. And so it doesn't matter if someone is just coming in and saying, I'm anxious all the time, or I had this huge criterion A trauma and I'm experiencing flashbacks all the time. Now I know I can help them no matter what. And so I just wanted to share that with you so that, like,
Thank you.
share how much that was
Yeah,
helpful for me and to let you
yeah,
know that you're not alone in that either, because that was like a big identity thing for me. Like, I don't work with anxiety, I do trauma and PTSD.
yeah.
And now I'm like, well, that's bullshit.
And I held a lot of shame actually for quite a long time until
Yeah,
I understood really what trauma is and how there is
exactly.
no big T trauma and little t trauma, and that's all very relevant to our nervous system and our capacity in the moment where an event happens and how our brain perceives that to be traumatic or not traumatic.
Exactly.
But I've since worked with a lot of other therapists. I think because I speak so openly about my experience of my own internal stuff as a therapist, I think I've automatically attracted, which I absolutely love. And so I have had conversations like this where I've felt, it's helped me as well to feel less and less guilt or shame about how I experienced my work, all those years ago for quite a long period of time
Yep.
until I had the courage to kind of just go, right, I need to start doing something else. Which I'll come on to in a second. But there was something else that you highlighted in there, which is there is no shame in this. We are all human and we are
Yep.
going to experience things that are uncomfortable. And the reasons aren't necessarily, like you said at the beginning, because we're bad therapists, but the true reasons are because of our own inner wounds, unresolved inner stress responses that weren't able to complete. Before we learned to be a therapist or psychologist, and unless we know that, we will experience. I experienced lots of other, dissonances. I used to feel if clients used to say to me very often, oh God, you've helped me so much, thank you so much. I would of course say, well, you did the work, which is true,
Right.
right? But I did hold space. I was really incapable of receiving, and it actually made me frightened
Mm.
to feel that they felt that I was responsible for their newfound well-being or happiness or whatever. And I used to feel that massive imposter syndrome as well. Not just for that reason, because they would compliment me and thank me and be grateful, and I couldn't receive because I just hadn't learned and I hadn't been role model how to receive, and I didn't have the self-worth to be able to receive. But it also scared me if they held me responsible, because it kind of triggered something in me that I wasn't a good enough therapist. Or
Mm.
for a long time, when people used to ask me what do you do, I used to just, I used to try and like avoid the answer, and not saying I didn't feel like I had a real clear profession, which is kind of crazy. And Yeah, it's all our inner unresolved stuff that lead to these places of discomfort for us as well.
Yep.
And it's inevitable that then in some ways those are then reflected in our work. But that does not, none of that means that we are not good enough therapists. We're all
Right.
doing the best we can with what we know. And hopefully, then when we know better, we do better, which is what happened to me. But it took, like you said, a very windy journey to that place, because when I started to feel really, really that level of discomfort where I just could not continue I just felt so out of integrity continuing to do this therapeutic work. And obviously I knew ethically that I couldn't. I started to retrain into lots of different holistic therapies. I'd already been trained as a holistic massage therapist, and knew anatomy and physiology, which helped me later on when I learned about the nervous system, etc. But I learned some kind of things. I was always like a girly girl that liked beauty therapy and all these kind of. And I've always been I do work with men as well, but I am a girl's girl. All right, through and through. So the majority of my client base has predominantly been women, and I thought I just need to do something a little bit more kind of light-hearted with my life. And I always was kind of the friend that did people's hair and makeup and, and I always loved it. So I started to retrain initially for myself, actually. I just wanted to kind of do my own lash lifts and, friends. And then one day I just kind of, I think I had some sort of midlife crisis in the middle of that. And I thought, I was qualified in 2 or 3 services, and I decided to create this kind of pamphlet that I sent out. This was before what here it's called GDPR, so you can't use, right, you have it
Right.
there as well. It's global. So I sent it to all, I have 3 children. I sent it to the parents class list and I said, I'm now doing this. One of those
Nice.
moments of kind of like, I'm just going to do this. And to my surprise, I had quite a few of the mums from the children's classes come and say, "Oh, can you come and do me?" And I just started doing these things almost as a distraction from my own. I continued to do the clinical practice, but reduced my caseload massively because that was the ethical way that I could continue to be a therapist and earn some money. There's a lot of things to balance, right? We are talking about balance earlier and what that is
Mhm.
about. Um, and then over those 4 years where I was feeling this kind of internal conflict and I grew my beauty therapy that became a clinic. And then somehow I attracted these investors and we were going to create this huge business around it. And it was very holistic. And little
Mhm.
did I know that it's called beauty therapy for a reason, because when
Mhm.
someone allows you to put, their hands on their bodies, there is an inherent trust that there has to happen. And of course, I was being paid less for doing treatments, but I was hearing the same stories come out,
Yep.
which was, very touching and a privilege and an honor as well. But it didn't really change, my role. That's why I say this is my calling, because
Mhm.
it just now, I mean, I've always had the kind of vibe, I suppose, where, because I'm curious as well. I'm curious about humans. That's one of the reasons I studied psychology. I've always been interested in human behavior and what people are thinking and why are they behaving a certain way. So, I meet people for the first time and they'll just tell me their whole life story,
I know.
you know, right? We have that vibe, don't we?
Right.
And
It's a thing.
yeah, so it's not necessarily, that's why I say it's not really a job, it's just who we are.
Yeah.
And yeah, so this business grew by itself, and it allowed me to kind of now I say temporarily close my clinical practice, but at that time it felt like, eventually a real closure. I kind of referred on the clients I had left, and this was the new me, Carla, the beauty therapist with, I
Mm.
had employees and we were going to create this huge business. And of course, the universe had a different plan, and COVID happened, and that
Yeah.
all the challenges through that. And it came, without boring you with all the ins and outs, but because of the pandemic and other family reasons, we decided to move out of the area that I'd lived in London for 20 plus years, where my business had been established to the point where we were going to grow. And I lost my investors because, COVID changed a lot of the rules, and
Mhm.
my business plan just wouldn't work for me as an individual in the time I wanted to work in. And I had to make a decision when we moved outside of London in Hertfordshire, which is where we now live. I had to decide, okay, do I stay with the beauty business and start again with that, or do I go back to my roots? And in the meanwhile, in the back, we had created a free community for mums during the pandemic, because I know that as a mum of 3 myself, I had some struggle, issues of loneliness. I missed the contact with my clients, both beauty and, clinical patients. And I felt almost like a duty to help. So I created a Facebook group, a free community to help mums. It grew like wildfire in a short space of time. There's approximately 2,000 women in there still. I haven't been as active in there because then, when I reopened, which I'm coming next to explain next, when I went back into my psychologist role, that took a back foot because there's only one of me and 2,000 people.
Yep.
So yeah, there's always been a thread, I realized, in that period of time, that, it's helping women in particular, and wanting to live a better life and help others do the same. Basically, that's
Yep.
kind of gone through all my, helping people feel better. And so when we then moved, it took me a good year. I was privileged enough to be able to allow myself that time, and I was in limbo. I wasn't sure, where do I go. I didn't want to go back to clinical practice and end up in the same place I had ended up after 20 years of a private practice. And a friend of mine, she said, "Oh, look, why don't you just do this consulting contract?" for this therapist who has a massive community and helping women with, from domestic abusive or
Mm.
violent situations. And I was like, okay, right, let's just go and do this contract and help these women. And as I started to kind of support these women through this huge community of 30,000 people, I was listening to their stories and commenting and helping them kind of get clarity around what they were experiencing. I went very, very quickly. I think within 4 weeks, I went into a massive vicarious trauma, burnout.
Yep.
And I literally physically, I went into what I now understand was a freeze state, dorsal vagal
Yeah.
shutdown, and I physically couldn't move my body. And it was much, much worse than what I'd ever experienced before in my clinical, professional life. And it scared me. And that's when I reached out to the therapist, who had no idea I was working for her. I was one of many people through an agency that was supporting her community. And I said, can you help me? I don't know. I've not been through, she specialized in narcissistic abuse, domestic violence, and all those kind of things. And I was like, I don't really understand. I have not been in narcissistic abusive relationships. I don't have any experience of domestic violence, and yet I am not able to continue working
Mhm.
in supporting these women because I just cannot physically do it, and I'm very worried.
Yep.
And she basically said to me, look, come and train with me, you'll understand. I told her obviously my background in psychology, and she said, look, I will help you with your healing, but also I think this is going to
Mm.
really, really help you to come back to your actual roots of psychology. And I was like, not sure. But anyway, that's the route I went down, and that's where the portal to the nervous system for me opened to, internal family systems, somatic experiencing, all the bottom up, incredible. This was kind of my introduction to a completely different world, and it felt like a hidden world up to that point. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, oh my goodness, how did I not know any of this? And I've been dealing with people's brains and lives for 20 odd years, and that's when I started sharing on social media my own personal journey as a therapist. Had not known all of this stuff. I felt again called to have to tell people about what I was learning. And it, again, the universe or whatever you believe in, I believe that, we think we have freedom, free will, but I'm not sure. That's a conversation for another time. But the universe put me on this path where it just literally reopened my practice. And again, even though by this stage I had much stronger boundaries, another thing that therapists, I think, as a therapist myself, in my previous therapist life, I really struggled with, and that also can lead often, a lot of us to burn out, again
Yep.
based on our, self-worthiness wounds. And I had, within a month of just posting reels every day on Instagram, because I thought, let me just see what this Instagram thing is about. I'd only ever used it for the beauty business, didn't really know anything about it. I've never been a user of these social media apps. I've now also stepped away from those because I've realized the kind of algorithms and how they are really not in integrity with what I'm teaching, and it creates a lot of dysregulation. We could have lots of spin-off conversations here. But at that time, I really felt called to share. And I thought, okay, my kids were on holiday. I think it was August. My kids were not at school. And I thought, what can I do while I'm continuing my own healing journey and learning all this stuff? And I'm a bit of a nerd, so I kind of go into these
Go
kind
all
of
the
deep
way.
levels of, I just haven't stopped. I think life is, about learning anyway. So, and I just really love it as well. I find it's fascinating. And so I started sharing, and then suddenly within the first month, I think I had 5 people contact me, 3 of whom I'd known personally. And in my previous therapist life, I, don't work with people, in this life, it's not the case, depending,
Mhm.
obviously it always depends
Right.
on the situation. But yeah, so my clinical practice started again by itself in a very, very different way. Of course, I still use tools and techniques that I learned, the foundational stuff, because cognitive is also really important.
Yeah, we still have
So
thoughts,
now,
we still have beliefs, right?
right, exactly. But I've understood that the nervous system piece is absolutely key, and unless we use and have that education and learn how to work with it rather than against it, we're going to constantly be stuck, like a lot of my clients were. When people would come back after 6 months and they would say, give me another problem, and it's like, I know the root is the same, but I just didn't know. And I
Mhm.
guess that was my imposter came up then as well. I was like, I know that this is kind of the same as what we've kind of dealt with before, but I'm not sure what else to do. We can kind of go through the same process, but then you're constantly reliant on this therapeutic relationship, which not everyone can afford to do either. And now it's very, very different, because my role as a therapist has changed in that, yes, still lots of validation, still giving, kind of cognitive behavioral therapeutic techniques, because they do help to kind of manage our symptoms. It's important to be able to, regulate ourselves enough to even do the deeper work. But it's about really teaching people to have agency again in their own bodies, in their own lives. And the work is very, very different. It's not a band-aid like it was before. It's not temporary. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a very, very different journey in that it's long. And it's not long because people have to work with me for years to come. It's long because it's their journey, and it's like a lifelong gift eventually. It's something that you end up kind of doing. Once you know this stuff, you can't unknow it, can you? It's not like going to therapy, your classic kind of talk therapy, where you talk through your problems, you start to feel a little bit better, and then something else happens in life and you have to kind of come back to process it with someone. And it's not to say either that you never go back to your therapist. You might, or you might go to a different one, but actually you just have so much more agency, and it means that you live the challenges in your own life going forward in a very, very different way. There is much less sense of helplessness or hopelessness, and just knowing how your body operates, it's a completely different experience, and one that I believe, which is one of the reasons I'm here speaking to you and speaking to lots of other colleagues, because I think all the stuff about the nervous system should be the foundation of everything that we all know, not just us as therapists, but actually people, layman people. Right, that's my aim, to talk to lots of therapists and lots of other people, because this is stuff that we should learn at school. They teach us the reproductive system, but they don't teach us our nervous system, our brain. This is our operating system. We're constantly, upgrading. I use this analogy a lot in a lot of podcasts. We get a ping, oh, it's time to upgrade, oh, next OS upgrade, and yet we're never taught how to upgrade our own operating system, which for all of us humans is programmed by other people, usually our parents or our caregivers or the school systems, our teachers, or even our friends in childhood. And now that we're adults, we can have awareness and agency on kind of repatterning our nervous system so that we don't operate from those old programs that might have served us in those days, but may not be serving us anymore, and actually may be hindering us in our life. So yeah.
So in speaking to all the therapists that are listening right now, I developed something called the trauma therapist trauma response. And it talks about how at the top of it is vicarious trauma, because we're going to experience it. It happens through empathic engagement. And so it's that transfer of energy that we're experiencing through attunement. And how when we don't have opportunities to, again, wring out that vicarious trauma sponge, manage vicarious trauma, it's going to turn into compassion fatigue, then secondary traumatic stress, then burnout. And we can be anywhere along this continuum at any moment. And it's not necessarily linear. But so thinking about all the therapists who are listening, no matter where they are on this continuum, what is the number one thing that you want them to take away from our conversation today, from your journey, from your learning, and from where you are right now in your work?
So if there was only one message that I would share, is it's not your fault. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not a bad therapist. And the second message, if I can, is go and look. Polyvagal theory is your starting point. You have to, and learn it for yourself before, because we have such a tendency to want to learn things for other people and help other people. But actually, it's the old kind of chestnut, isn't it? You can't pour from an empty cup. And that is so true. When we look at our nervous system, if we think of it as a cup, even if that cup is full and our nervous system is at full capacity, we just cannot help other people. We cannot hold any more that's coming from the outside in. And yes, countertransference is, I think, what you were referring to, does happen in sessions. However, I don't think it ever needs to get to that kind of point where, you go down the black hole and you feel
Right.
like, it doesn't.
Doesn't
If
have
you
to get
get to
stuck.
have
It does happen, but it doesn't have to get stuck and pull you down.
absolutely. Absolutely. You can, the more you learn about your nervous system, because it's so individual, every one of our nervous systems operates slightly differently. And once you have that understanding or interoceptive ability, when you actually can feel yourself from the inside and you understand what your body's telling you, because the body signals come first. And this is another thing that we aren't taught from, our foundational levels. The signals start in the gut from the body. It travel 80% of signals go from the body to the brain, and then the brain, with all its trauma, makes a perception of what it means and brings it back down, and then we act. But actually, if you can kind of intercept and understand and learn your body's way of communicating in sensations, which is happening all of the time, and obviously trauma disconnects us from our body. Right. And if you're in this job, it's likely that you've had experiences of traumatic or just chronic stress or all of it, and there's always stuff to process. That, like you said, the word layers, even now, in sessions with clients, something will, and I won't be afraid to, even cry if it comes up with a client and say and name it and just say, this is happening for me right now. We're just humans, and it is so much safer than being with a human that is having to swallow some emotion because something you've said, just like it happened right at the beginning of our conversation, right? We are, trauma happens in relationships. It's relational, and therefore we heal relationally too. And it's about being able to feel safe enough to be our full authentic selves. And it's about being able to relearn that. And the way into that is through understanding the mind-body connection. It's one. You can't kind of just address the cognitive parts of us without addressing the body, because they're one.
Absolutely. So where can people continue to learn from you and just your immense knowledge and passion and authenticity? That's a word that comes up for me when I get to interact with you. So where can people continue to work with you, learn more about you?
So, as I said, in the past, I would have said, just look me up on social media, on Facebook, and there is lots of content there that I've produced over the years. So if that's the place you like to hang out, go ahead. No judgment there, but you won't find anything too fresh except when I share about conversations like this on there, or, other things that might come up, but it's not a consistent kind of flow of information, but just don't want to encourage people to go places where they're more dysregulated than anything else, even if it is to connect with me. So the best place is probably my website, carlashohet.com. I also have a podcast myself, and I am in the process of editing the second series, where there'll be lots of conversation with some incredible speakers, the likes of Deb Dana, Dr. Dan Siegel, people like that where you will get lots of incredible education, very connected, very authentic, because there's a lot of noise online from lots of different people, and it's great because we can access the information. There's loads of information, but there's also amongst that a lot of misinformation. So I hope to provide to be one of those people that provides a good source of good information through my podcast. There are already some episodes from the first series out there. My website is being built as we speak, and it's been a labor of love. And it's just me and a couple of people who are my tech team. You met one of them earlier, and my husband. And it's going to be full. I've been writing lots of blogs. I've been, the time away from social media has provided me a space where I can focus very much on creating content that is actually helpful without all the kind of distractions. Exactly. And it will be placed on my website. There will be lots of resources for free, and then there's obviously my paid program Thanara that you can have a look at. And one-to-one work. I still continue with my one-to-one practice, but I do hope that more and more we can share this information on a larger scale. So Thanara will eventually be the primary place where you can find a way to work with me. So yeah, my website.
Great.
And
We
it
will
will
link
change over
to
time. So keep
all of
coming
that
back
in
to it.
the notes below. We'll link to that so it's easy
Thank
for
you.
people to just click right on over to carlashohet.com. Thank you
Perfect.
so much for your time, Carla. This has just been such an incredible conversation. I'm so grateful that the universe allowed all the pieces to come together today. And I know that there's going to be so many amazing future things that we'll get to do together as well. I'm really excited.
I hope so too. I hope so too.
Thank you.
I'm wonderful talking to you. Take good care. Bye, everyone.